Randy Credico live on the fly on WBAI and Progressive Radio Network. This is my first video of the day. I am getting close to the Donbass region. This is what would be a wall of people, soldiers, Red Army soldiers that liberated Donbass in '43, a major victory over the Nazis and the Soviets push westward to liberate Europe from the Nazis.
Get out your notebook. There's more.
Welcome to CNLive, Season 5, Episode 5, Witness to Destruction. I'm Joe Lauria, Editor-in-Chief of Consortium News, and I'll be joined by my co-host, Elizabeth Voss. Randy Credico is a radio host, an activist, and a political comedian. He has spent 2 weeks in Russia and in Donbass as the war in Ukraine continues to rage. Randy Credico joins us tonight from Moscow to tell us what he's witnessed and what the mood is like in the Russian capital.
This is Randy Credico, live on the fly for WBAI and Progressive Radio Network and the Pacifica Network. I am here. This is an open market in downtown Donetsk. This place yesterday, this open market, it's an open market like we have in New York City, the farmer's market. That's what you have here. And 2 bombs, 2 HIMARS were launched from the Ukrainians to this spot here, killing 9 people yesterday. Just down the block at a university, one person, maybe 2 died there, but they hit indiscriminately civilians here and at the university. 2 bombs. They come, and 20 minutes later, another one hits as the emergency crews are cleaning up. That's been the MO. And the mainstream media is not talking about it, but we are. We'll have more on this. I'm Randy Credico live on the fly in Donetsk, People's Republic of Donetsk. See you. We are in Mariupol, in the DPR, the Donetsk People's Republic, having what is one of the most delicious pizzas I've ever had in my life. And it's a little stand here. They have coffee, they have sandwiches, they have hot dogs, they have hamburgers. We're on our way out. We just saw what was the destruction of the city by the Azov Battalion with their NATO advisors. I want to show you close up some of the destruction that took place here in April and March of 2022, and the kind of tactics that the Azov Battalion used. They would occupy a building like this with civilians. They actually use civilians as shields, which is totally in violation of the Geneva Convention. It was such an outrage that when the regular army came in from Ukraine and saw what was going on, they were astonished. What they did to this city, and why this city is totally in support of the DPR. It will never give up. Did you think you were going to survive? Did you think you would survive all of this?
Вы понимали, что вы выживете? Вы думали, что вы выживете? Или было...
No.
Only hope.
Did you have a lot of friends that did die?
Были ли, есть знакомые ваши погибли, да?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're joined now by Randy Credico from Moscow, Russia. Randy, welcome to CNLive.
A pleasure and an honor to be on CNLive, and I hope that the transmission is good from where I am here in Moscow.
Yes, I think everything should be fine. So, Randy, how long, you're in Moscow now, but you've also been to Donbass. How long have you been in Russia? And give us an overall impression to begin with. Now that maybe you've had a few days to think about what you've experienced, how do you feel about it?
That'll take a while, Joe. Let me just begin. I came here on April 2nd. I spent a few days in Moscow, and then reluctantly, I was all enthusiastic about going. Then I got a little nervous, but then I went to the Donetsk People's Republic, both the city of Donetsk and to Mariupol for 6 days altogether. That included the train rides and the trip down there from Rostov in an armored vehicle, which when I was in an armored vehicle, I said, wait a second, where am I going?
But so it's all together. I've been in Russia. I think a total of 12 or 13 days.
And how much longer are you staying?
I'm leaving Sunday to Dubai and then back to New York City next Tuesday. So, and to be met by a couple of FBI agents and other secret agents at the JFK airport. So I'm actually bracing myself for that eventuality. So altogether, I've gone almost 3 weeks when I left on the 29th from New York City.
Well, on that question, Randy, do you were there specific sanctions that they might say you violated? Are Americans allowed to travel to Russia right now?
Well, I'm a journalist. You know, I'm working for WBAI and Progressive Radio Network, but I'm sure within the laws, they could find something there to charge me with. The same way the 1917 Espionage Act has been used to, contrive charges against Julian Assange. The Justice Department is very creative when it comes to revenge against those people who do things that runs against the grain.
I remember talking to you before you left, Randy, that you had some trepidation, as anyone would, going to a war zone. As you told George Galloway, you're not a war correspondent, so you're not used to that. But do you have any regrets now having gone on this trip?
No. You know what? The day before we were to set sail to Donbass, I had said I'm not going because we took a first aid course the day before for the red zone, the yellow zone, and the green zone. And we're talking about tourniquets and, being hit by a shell and losing a leg and all of that. We spent hours and hours. And first of all, I'm incapable of practicing any kind of first aid. And so when I saw that, how serious this situation is, this is a war zone, I said, I'm not going. But then that night, I said to myself, if I don't go, and, John Pilger had to urge me to go. He says, whatever happens, you've got to do it. And so did other experienced war correspondents, which I am not. I'm kind of like Zelig or Forrest Gump in this situation. But I said, if I don't go, I will regret it the rest of my life. And so the 5 days I was around that area, I was, I'm no hero. I was scared. I was looking over my shoulders. I was in every restaurant that I would go to, any hotel I would go to, I would try to find a spot in that place that wouldn't be hit by a Heimer. And it was very difficult to find a spot like that. So I didn't sleep much. Everyone knows here that I slept 1-2 hours a night until I got back to Moscow. But, I'm not a citizen of Donetsk. They live with this every single day. For me, I'm a newcomer. I don't live with it. People who are tourists come to New York City and they hear about the shootings in the Bronx and the pushing into the subway in Brooklyn and all sorts of other spontaneous crimes that you can't avoid. But I never think about that, and neither do you. When we're in New York, we're not looking around to be pushed into the subway or to be shot. So we've gotten used to it, and people here. And a much worse, it's not a good comparison, but they've actually, are able to go on with their lives. Like in Donbass, the first night I was there was a shelling of a university, and the next day, a shelling of an open air market like the Chelsea market or the Union Square farmers market, and that killed 8 or 9 people. And the worst thing about it is they foist this Heimer indiscriminately into civilian populated areas, and then 20 minutes later, when the emergency services show up, they do it again.
Moments after, within 20 minutes of the other side that you saw, the bombing in the open market, which is across the street, this happened over here. And that's the MO of these, I don't know what kind of special units they are with the Ukrainians, but they're launching in civilian populated areas. There's no military value to this. It's only civilians, and it's to strike terror in the public here. I mean, I'm nervous right now being here, all right? So I understand what their tactics are, but it killed 9 people. And so you can see the damage that was done by these Heimer rockets. They blast it once and they come back and they blast it again. As you can see, look at the damage that has been done here. Look at the floor here. I got to go. These are quick videos. We'll have more. I'm Randy Credico live on the fly on 99.5 FM. As you can see, there it is in New York City, and for the Progressive Radio Network and the Pacifica Network. We'll have more. Thank you. I'm talking with right now Pasha, who is with the defenders of the onslaught by the Ukrainian, what I consider to be Nazi battalions. Why are they shelling civilian areas here in Donbass?
Oh, because Ukrainian regime think Russians or Donbass people not a human. They say Russians is orcs.
So that's what you're facing. And since you don't know where these are mobile units, these Ukrainian, what I call the Contras, remember the Contras in Nicaragua, that's what they got here in the Ukrainians have. It's their Contras, the Azov battalion, shooting off these missiles to strike fear in the public. Well, they certainly struck fear in me. And I don't think I'm ever going to get over it, to be honest with you. It's like I don't sleep well at night, and that's the whole purpose, is to strike fear in the 2 million people that live in Donbass. 2 million people, and all I can tell you is their resolve. They're not giving up. They're not allowing Ukraine to come in there at all. To the last person, they will fight back. And you saw the next day, in that open air market, the very next day, when I was there were, 20, 30 stalls, because it's Easter Sunday coming up here. And there were women selling flowers. They set up their stands, people selling electronics, as if nothing happened the day before. They just go through with it. So it's quite astonishing, and it's impressive to see. Except for what's not impressive is my cowardice in the wake of all of this.
Well, Randy, you decided to go. I don't know if that would qualify as cowardice. Well, you mentioned Nicaragua. You were there. How do you compare situations in terms of the danger that you faced? I mean, first of all, how close were some of the explosions you heard in Donetsk or any other part of Donbass you may have been in? And how did that compare to the danger you faced when you were in Nicaragua?
Well, I was in Nicaragua from 85 to 90. And, that was the time when Ben Linder was murdered, and a lot of civilians and foreigners were murdered that were helping out the Sandinistas. And so there was indiscriminate shootings, bombings, ravages and rapings of villages by the Contras. And so that's what I think they're facing right here. Rather than face the military one-on-one. I mean, there is a military presence here in Donetsk, but the Ukrainians that are 10 kilometers away don't want to face them one-on-one. They'd rather strike fear in the public rather than facing them one-on-one. That's exactly what the Contras did back in the 80s. And yes, I was down there. I was in Mayaguez, and I was on the northern front. That was the last war zone I was ever in, was in Nicaragua back in 86, 87, 88, and 89. And it's been a long time since. But this scared me more. The last week had more of an impact on me now than what that did back in the 80s on me. But the similarities between the Contras that we supported and the Ukrainians that we are supporting right now, I don't know how to describe them, but this is the regular army in Ukraine, what's left of it. When they went into Mariupol, where I was, you'll see the other video, and I'm digressing here a little bit. When they came in March and April of 2022 and saw what the Azov battalion from the Azov stall up there where there's this huge steel mill, and they had NATO advisors up there shelling the city, and then their tanks shelling the populated areas, these buildings, schoolhouses, churches, and whatever. The regular army was astounded that they were doing this.
It's Randy Credico here in this is Nicholas Street, and I am in this wonderful, used to be a beautiful city called Mariupol, but as you can see, it was completely destroyed during the fighting back in March and April of last year. Look at this street. It's amazing the amount of destruction all the way down. And they were hit hard. They were shelled hard from over there. That's called Azovstal, way over there. It's a steel area where they produce steel. And so they were shelling from there, and you can see the damage. It just is all around. A lot of civilians were killed. I don't know what's going to happen reconstruction. As you can see, it's like trying to rebuild Dresden in a day in 1945. We'll have more on this. I'm Randy Credico, live on the flight. Completely blown away. I hate to use that term, but mesmerized by the amount of destruction. When you see this firsthand, you see it on television, but when you see it firsthand, it will have an impact on you. Please continue to listen and watch WBAI 99.5 FM New York City, also the Progressive Radio Network. Thank you very much.
So the regular Ukraine Army Defense Forces were astounded by the Azov Battalion, which was 90% of the fighting here in the city, which is 100% Russian. This is a Russian city. So I don't know how to compare it with except for the fact that there is the similarity is they use terror tactics rather than doing things militarily and fighting one-on-one with the military. They are resorting to terror like the Contras did. The Contras never would engage in battles with the Sandinistas because they were better fighters and they had support in Nicaragua. So they had to resort to terrorize the communities that supported the Sandinistas. And that's what they're doing right here. The special forces, whatever they are, but these Azov battalions, they are not part of the regular military. Maybe they are, but they're resorting to terror tactics rather than fighting militarily and going after military targets.
This one, it's really gut-wrenching. Take a look at this. This is one of the oldest buildings in Mariupol, and it was, you see these big holes there? That was Azov Battalion tanks shelling with huge millimeter shells in May, April, and March of 2020. As I said, this is one of the oldest buildings. It looks like the Alamo in 1837. It's completely destroyed. And it's terrifying to think back at what it was like for those people living in this building or going to school in this building. That's all I can take right now. Credico, live on the fly, WBAI, and Progressive Radio Network.
Azov, jihadists, and Contras. There's a long line directly from Central America in the 80s to today with the Middle East in between, and how the U.S. uses such awful groups to pursue the American interest. Elizabeth.
Yeah, Randy, thank you so much for sharing with us your experiences and also these clips that you took at the time. You talked about the people that you were meeting and the way that they're just going on with their lives almost as usual. Can you tell us more about the individual people you've met and you've spoken with and what they had to say?
Well, I don't want to reveal too much, but, I was at various meetings here, not here in Moscow, but in Donbass. And the conversations there were, in one spot where there were 8 or 9 individuals from various sectors, was not if and when Russia ends this war, but do they do it without using nuclear forces. All right, is it going to have to rely on that? Is the West going to continue to intensify I mean, Orban said today from Hungary, said that there is no Ukraine left anymore. Financially, it's only the U.S. and the West pouring like a drunken, an alcoholic in a gaming casino, a bunch of money into a slot machine that's not ever going to hit, except for the pockets of Zelensky. All right, he's going to get it, but it's doing no good for this force is defeated. Bakhmut, you will see it's over there. And so what happens now to keep this zombie afloat, the Ukrainian Defense Forces, which is to pour in Western military forces. They've already got at least 100, if we can believe this latest leak. And the only way they can continue to defend, what's left of Ukraine, whatever is Ukraine. Now, I want to go back. It's Russians fighting Russians, all right? And that's what they're exploiting. These are Russians fighting Russians. Ukraine fought with the Soviet Union. They were part of all of the Soviet states that fought against Nazi Germany. But there were groups, Nazi-affiliated groups in the what would be kind of like the Azov Battalion. They were called the Nightingale or the Galatian battalions that were pro-Nazis and fought and killed 100,000 Poles and 40,000 Jews and countless Russians. They were those elements under the leadership of their spiritual leader, Stepan Bandera and others. All right, so there was that element there, but the majority of Ukrainians are Russian. They're Russian. Ukraine is a philosophy. It's not a state. Everyone's a Slav here. So they're pitting Russians against Russians here for whatever interest they have in the West to keep this horrible situation going. There's already 300,000 Ukrainians that are dead. I mean, that means 300,000 Russians are dead. All right, they're not Ukrainians, they're Russians. So it's like, all right, do you think that Blinken or Jake Sullivan or Victoria Nuland gives a rat's ass about any one of these Ukrainians that have died? Not on your life.
Tell us more about what the conversations were that you witnessed and heard, and what kind of the word was on the ground. Sure.
Let me go back. So they are the conversations are. It's like that woman. I was in a little place the other day across from where Wyatt Reed was staying. I was there for one night at a hotel, and right across the street there's a beautiful park and a traditional Russian restaurant. And I was in there with 4 or 5 other individuals. And the conversation was about, even though I kept walking away from the table, looking for a spot that I might survive if a Heimer were to hit this place. And it was a legitimate target for the Ukrainians because it was a traditional Russian restaurant. I said, why are you guys taking me here? But the conversation centered on the prospect of nuclear weapons. It's going to go to that. And so how much do Raytheon and Lockheed and these other corporations and these congressmen who get money from these corporations, how much do they gamble before they pull back to try to make profits off of this before it becomes nuclear? Because that's what they're doing by expanding this war, by not expanding, but exacerbating and escalating this war. It means it's the escalation not only of the war, but the acceleration of the doomsday clock. We're going to get closer to doomsday because they're not giving up. Russia is not going to give up this territory. They've lost too many people, and everybody that I've been around support the Russian military operation. And even if I say that, special military operation, I get branded as a Putin puppet or the Kremlin comic with a K, but I'm not. I'm a puppet of peace. And the only way to get peace and to avoid a nuclear war is to stop it. Public has got to stop it. They're not going backwards here in Russia. And the U.S. and the West can no longer keep this corpse alive. Really, you cannot keep this going. You've got to negotiate. Right now, there's got to be dialogue to end it. Otherwise, it will end up. I really believe this because a lot of people out here do believe it. They will. Yeah. There will be a nuclear exchange, one nuclear weapon, and then there's two, and then there's three, and that's enough. Hiroshima is a firecracker compared to the nuclear weapons they have today. And but I can tell you that the sense here in Moscow, where you would think, if you go by the Western press, CNN, Jake Tapper and the other clowns there, Barbara Starr, MSNBC, Ari Melber and Chris Hayes and the rest of these Operation Mockingbird hacks reside, that this city and this country is suffering from the sanctions. I can tell you this, there's no suffering here. I've been for 9 days in Moscow. There's traffic all the time. The restaurants are full, the markets are full.
I would suggest that everybody, but it's difficult to get here, travel yourself to Russia and come back with your own conclusions rather than depending on a corporate talking head. That's all I can say. Be objective, come over here. You don't have to listen to what I say, just come over and see for yourself. I suggest it because planet Earth is at stake.
If you want to look for spots where the sanctions are having an effect, go to Berlin or go to Hamburg and you will see, or go to England where it's either heat or oil for your car. That's where the sanctions are working. They're not working here. In fact, I just want to go off on a tangent here. I was at this wonderful place called the Depot Food Mart yesterday, where they had, it's the most beautiful place, and I put it online. But they have, because of the sanctions, craft beers from the US are no longer allowed here. So guess what? They have a huge craft beer industry here in Moscow, and I guess the rest of the country, but it's had absolutely no effect whatsoever. The lights are on, it's more beautiful. The city is clean. You see the street cleaners coming by, washing, not just like going by like they do in a cursory way in New York City, but they actually wash the streets here. You could eat off the streets of Moscow. It's the cleanest city, the most beautiful city, and the busiest city I've ever seen in my life.
Wow. And now you talked about the targeting of civilians in Ukraine by the Azov Battalion. We don't hear about that in Western and US media almost ever, and it's always the other way around. How are those attacks being attributed to them? I mean, I know that you saw a shell in person. I mean, are you able to see on that where it's from? I mean, how are you determining that that's where those attacks are coming from?
Well, you can tell by their HIMARS missiles made by Lockheed. They're HIMARS missiles made by Lockheed, and you can tell, I'm not going to tell you how I know, but everybody knows, they're coming from 10 miles from the west, 10 kilometers where the front line is. That's the red zone. All right, that's the front. I thought I was going to be buried 100 miles behind the front, but I was only 10 kilometers, which is not even between, where Joe and I were in the Washington Square Park and on the upper west side at 110th Street. So it's very close. And so they have these mobile units. They're coming in. They're HIMARS missiles. The Russians don't have them, but the Ukrainians do. They're supplied to them. Lockheed's not giving them to the Russian army. They're giving those weapons to Ukrainians. So they're coming in from the front line over there, and they're landing, and they're hitting specific spots. And it's always civilian spots, but that's what Donetsk is. It's all civilians there. It's not like a big military enclave.
Yeah. Joe, did you have a follow-up on that one?
Yeah, Randy. First of all, I think you'd probably get an argument from Ukrainians about whether they're Ukrainians or not. The language is different, closer to Polish than Russian, it sounds like, Ukrainian. And certainly in Donbass, where you were, is majority Russian. There's no question about that. And was the cause of this conflict. They didn't support the coup in 2014 that overthrew the president that they had backed, Viktor Yanukovych. And they declared their independence, and Russia took 8 years to even recognize that independence. And most of our viewers know this history. So let me ask you about Moscow. What is the mood there in terms of the war? Have you heard criticisms or support, or are people just ignoring it? You described a normal functioning city. Do the people there, do you sense that they're aware or talking about the war?
Yeah, well, definitely. That's something I ask a lot of people. Where I am, I've asked workers here that are Russian, and they totally agree with the position of the Russian Federation government's policy, particularly when it comes to the Donetsk People's Republic. They agree with all of that, and they agree with the policy. To people I've spoken to, and these are not like poor people. These are like middle-class people that I have at the market yesterday. There were a couple of women there that don't support Putin, and they speak out. They don't support the war. But he's got 80%, 82% in recent polls support here for the policies. So he's a very popular figure here. Now, that doesn't mean I support war. I'm a peace anti-war activist all my life, as you know, but this was going to come to a head sooner or later as the West continued to expand with NATO and encroach on the sovereignty and threaten the frontiers of Russia. So if they had not had that coup that you brought up, and yes, I know there's a separate language, in Ukrainian language, but at the same time, Ukrainians are in Kiev are stamping out, any kind of dissent. They don't let any Western journalists there or domestic journalists there who question the policies of the Zelensky puppet government. And they don't, and I shouldn't say that. We'll just say that Zelensky's operating on his own. If you want to believe that, that's your prerogative. But what they're doing to the church there. We remember Nicaragua, how they use the Sandinistas are desecrating these synagogues there, and they use that as a reason to foment opposition to the Sandinistas. Well, let me tell you this: they're doing what the Sandinistas were doing in Nicaragua. They're doing that in reality here. They're stanching out any kind of Eastern Orthodox practices, closing down these mosques or these cathedrals, and they're preventing people who practice that kind of religion. And not only that, they're burning books. They're collecting books by Tolstoy, on Chekhov, Pushkin, and Dostoevsky. They collect these books and they burn them. Now, when was the last time you saw something like that? I think it was like 1934, 35 in Berlin. So they're not tolerating Russian culture in Kiev, in the western part of whatever you want to call it, Ukraine.
I just want to show you the damage done. This is a piece of, this is an apartment building, Stalin-era apartment building, which was totally destroyed. You'll see a lot of this in the city, and it definitely cannot be rebuilt. And you can see on this other side, more apartment buildings that were destroyed. But if it's repairable, you'll see what they're doing right now. There's a lot of construction going on in this city, trying to salvage what was hit but could be repaired. So This has been an amazing city to see. It's almost like Dresden, a small Dresden in 1945. There's been so much destruction, a lot of hand-to-hand combat that took place here.
What is your hope going forward?
Ну, насчет Украины дальше
Да.
не могу сказать, потому что я не знаю. А насчет Мариуполя, я думаю, что я на это очень сильно надеюсь, полагаюсь. И даже сейчас уже видно то, что восстанавливает город. И мне кажется, он будет развит и дойдет до уровня Москвы.
She will not speak about Ukraine because she doesn't know what will happen with Ukraine, but she can tell about Mariupol. She hopes that it will be reconstructed and repaired.
Do you trust the Zelensky government coming in here and giving you the respect that you've gotten so far?
Нет, я считаю то, что этот правитель, он больше комиком ему сниматься.
No, she thinks that he's just bad comic.
It's a bad comic.
Yeah, not.
I like that. I agree with you. He's a terrible comedian.
Вопрос теперь к вам. No,
I'm a good comedian. You know, I'm a comedian too, but I'm a good comedian.
Did you experience any anger towards you from any Russians or any people in Donbass because you're American?
No, that woman there, Valeria, who's 19 years old, had no animosity towards me. I think the only animosity I got was at the market yesterday from these two elderly women who hated Putin and for whatever reason never got into the bottom of it. But most people have been so gracious. No matter where I go here, people don't hate Americans. They hate American foreign policy. They can distinguish between, it's like, you hate Russians. The US wants you to hate Russians. When you get over here, it's impossible to hate Russians because they're just like us. We're all God's children. They're highly educated. They are culturally educated. I mean, they got kids here, 12, 13 years old that go to watch opera or watch Tchaikovsky or Shostakovich. They actually go, they know. This is a highly intelligent culture. They make it look like we're dealing with some mongrels or something, the US. This is a smarter culture than we are. Overall, I mean, intellectually, I mean, they produced the greatest literature in the last 200 years, the greatest music in the last couple of hundred years, and the only full-scale revolution, and ever since that revolution in 1917 in October, and I'm going to see John Reed's body and Big Bill Haywood's body tomorrow in the Moscow Wall necropolis, where they are both buried, and one other American. But ever since that day, 2017, 2018, Russia has been the victim of this unrelenting, ridiculous, bigoted propaganda, demonization, vilification. And it was that was the first Red Scare in 1919. Second Red Scare was in the 50s, late 40s, early 50s in the McCarthy era. And now we've gone over that. It's no longer the Red Scare, it's the Bear Scare. All right. So the same kind of ad hominems and nasty, vilifying characterizations of the Russians continue today, but you got to go here. Just come here on your own and say, wow, this is one of the most remarkable civilizations it's like, the Aztecs and the Mayans 1,000 years ago. Come here right now, see how clean the streets are, see how intelligent the population is here. This is a remarkable culture, and I'm not being like a Russia file. I'm just telling you, laying out the facts here. I had to see it for myself, because if I believe the Western media, when I showed up, I would be expecting bread lines, soup kitchens, and people pushing apple carts and selling apples to make a nickel an apple. It's just the opposite of that. So if they're lying about that, what else are they lying about? And I'm sure I'm repeating myself. I'm becoming redundant. But culturally, who compares with Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky and Rimsky-Korsakov and Prokofiev in U.S. music? Nobody. Who? Aaron Copland? George Gershwin? Not a patch on their asses.
I'll tell you how smart the West is. All those composers, Rimsky-Korsakov, Tchaikovsky, and Rachmaninoff, you can't hear them in the West. They even tried to ban Dostoevsky in Italy. That backfired. So that's the way the West has been dealing with this. I saw an NBC report early in the war about the burning of books in Kiev. You don't see that anymore in the media, but what you now are seeing is proof that the Western media was lying about this war with these leaked documents in the Washington Post reported the other day that the so-called spring offensive that the Ukrainians have been planning, that they can't do it. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the trained personnel. They're not ready for this offensive, that Ukraine is losing this war. And we've been told here in the West how much Ukraine is winning. And of course, those of us who are following the war very carefully and listening to both sides knew, of course, the facts that Russia was not losing the war and that their strategy is to grind down Ukraine and not necessarily to go in there full blast like the Americans would do in Iraq and just kill hundreds of thousands of people to try to get a quick victory. This is not the Russian strategy, obviously, but the Western media was lying, and they've now admitted it with these leaked documents that they've been lying to us all this time.
Let me just say one thing, Joe.
Yeah.
I couldn't say it better than what you just said. I would take what you just said and put that as a clip, and I would definitely retweet that. That as a clip, and what you just said encapsulates the entire situation here.
I'll give you another one that could be a clip. You said come to Russia. I've been twice in Russia in 1995, November 95, and November 2015, exactly 20 years apart. And the Moscow that I saw in 1995, this was the Yeltsin years. This is when Wall Street moved in, when they partnered with a new class of oligarchs. They asset stripped the formerly state-owned industry, enriched themselves and impoverished the Russian people. There were, I saw about 50 homeless people in front of a train station, burning fires. It was devastating. Two guys tried to rob me. My camera had to run into the metro. The cab driver was stopped by the cops. I saw him paying a bribe. It was total chaos under Yeltsin in 95. 20 years later, I flew in from Berlin and I flew into another European city. It was just as clean as you're saying, as orderly, as beautiful. And I went to St. Petersburg, which is far more beautiful than Moscow, than a Western European city is. And that explains why the Russian people have an 80% approval rating of Putin, whatever else they may disagree with him about. And I know there's a lot of disagreement in Russia that he's not going hard enough, that he's pursuing that strategy I just said of grinding down rather than going full bore, that he also waited 8 years instead of moving right after the coup when it was clear, and he let himself be hoodwinked by Merkel and Hollande and the others who admitted that they never intended to implement the Minsk Accords. It was time to build up to NATO, to train, to make Ukraine a de facto NATO nation. But I saw a Russia that it explains why he's popular, because he's brought stability to Russia, and he brought back the people from the brink of absolute poverty and desperation. What did the U.S. want, in my opinion, Randy, you may agree, to go back to the 90s, and they can't do that with Putin there. In the 2007 Munich conference, that's what they want. They want to get rid of him and put in a guy like Yeltsin so they can go back to exploiting that country, which is enormously full of wealth, as you know, natural wealth.
Well, I got to tell you something, Joe. That's two clips that I would use. You've summarized it better than I could, and I concur with every point that you just made. And I'm glad that you made those points, because I may have missed them. But the analysis is right on, that they would like to return to the days. And we've read a lot of these articles in Consortium News by John Pilger, exactly what the designs of the West are. And that is to make this go back retrogressively back to the days of Yeltsin. But it's not going to happen. And the people, how he was able this is almost like Reconstruction after the Civil War, how he was able to take what Yeltsin gave away and the exploitation by the West and bring it, unlike Reconstruction, it came to an end in 1873, 78, when Hayes got in. But here you have a leader that is continuing. He's not going to go back to the days of Yeltsin. He's made this country a proud country. And so there's a lot of appreciation. 80% approval rating is unheard of. 83, what if even if it's 60, you would never get that. When was the last time you saw a president have a higher approval rating than Putin has here in the United States? Biden, what's he got? 30, 40%? I don't know who supports him, what policies they support. I can't imagine anybody supporting accelerating this war, escalating this war that will lead to a nuclear war. What is he doing? If he wants to win this, if the Democrats want to win the next election, they have one way of doing it. That is to sit down, negotiate, bring this to an end, and not be beholden to Raytheon, McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed, and General Electric, and all of the other ghouls that are looking to make dough off of this conflict. If he would just say, all right, if he's a real statesman, he said, it's over. We got to preserve the human race and sit down and negotiate, because it's going to get to the point where Russia will be in Kiev before long, and then it's totally over for the West.
Well, given the lies that the media has been telling about this war repeatedly, I see unbelievable articles about the Russian economy just about to collapse. And then the IMF comes out with a report saying there's growth, actually a small amount of growth in Russia right now. I mean, they just ignore Western sources about what the economy is like in Russia. I want to ask you the question about how you work there. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of critics who are going to say, oh, Credico was a puppet there of the Russians because they had minders. They just brought him to see people they wanted him to see, and there was their interpreters. And so how much freedom did you feel you had moving around wherever you've been so far to do and see whatever you wanted?
I have nobody looking over my shoulder. In fact, when I was in Donbass, there's a curfew there in Donbass, and the people that, they got to protect. Nobody wants to see me killed. Nobody in this government wants to see me killed. They knew I was going down there. But, I was on Dubai time when I was there, which is 2 hours later, and the curfew's from 11 to 5. And I got up, what I thought was 5:30 in the morning, and it was actually only 3:30 in the morning. And I went walking around I just want to get a breath of fresh air. And then when I got out like 50 yards, I realized the curfew was still on. I said, wait a second, and I started walking back, and I fell down. I still have a lump on my head, and I violated the curfew and the rules. I mean, people here don't want to see me get killed there because they'll get the blame. But there's never been anyone monitoring what I say. I go out and do my own thing every single day. You can see it on Twitter. I put out 40 or 50 2-minute reports. I did WBAI last week. Nobody's there monitoring me. And they may not agree with everything that I have to say, but I have total what's the word? I got liberty to say what I want to say here. And if I disagree with something, I will say it. I wouldn't have that. I would go to Kiev, but I know I would not have the freedom to say what I would like to say. Here I do. Nobody's monitoring me. I've been paying for my flights, have cost me a fortune coming out here. The hotel rooms are not that expensive. The armored car, I didn't pay for the armored car from Rostov to the DPR, but I've been paying for it myself. Nobody is, like I said, nobody's monitoring me and looking over I don't have to look over my shoulder to see if somebody's watching. I do what I want to do, and I got total freedom here. But I am, like Michael Isikoff said that yelled at me today because I'm not out there screaming about this Wall Street Journal reporter. I don't know enough about the case. I have heard information about the case. I don't want to see any journalists behind bars. You know me, I'm a free speech guy. If he hasn't done anything, they should let him go tomorrow. But if they have proof, and we'll find in the coming days, but this country is at war right now, at war. If the US was being attacked right now, and we weren't even attacked in 1917, but those who opposed the war were put in jail. People like Eugene Debs, we weren't attacked at all. And they were putting people under the Espionage Act in jail back then. 2,000 people were put in jail because they opposed the war. Okay, it's really hypocritical to condemn Russia for they didn't shoot the guy. He's under investigation right now, and I hope that he's cleared and he's freed. But if he did commit espionage, then he's in Russia. Julian Assange, let's go to that. He didn't commit espionage. He's not an American citizen. He wasn't in America, and he's being prosecuted and tormented for years now. So the U.S. media doesn't have a leg to stand on here when they're calling for an immediate release of a Wall Street Journal reporter who was out in the eastern part of Russia instead of where I was. I could go to the eastern part. That would be easy. That would be easy for me to go east. All right, going west into the war zone is difficult, and that's where that reporter should be if he is a war correspondent. I hope he didn't do anything wrong and that he's released, and I'm sure if he hasn't done anything wrong, he will be released. But I have taken so much shit that I'm a Putin puppet, that I'm, like I said, the Kremlin with a K comic, because that's not the focus of my work out here. My focus of my work is to prevent a nuclear war in my own small way. If there's 1 million people like me, maybe we can stop it. But I'm a puppet of peace. I'm the peace dog puppet. That's it.
You know, Randy, I define the difference between journalism and espionage in that the gathering information is the same. It's what you do with that information. A spy will just give it back to his government, to his agency, and it remains there because that's what spying is. But a journalist gets the same kinds of information and gives it to the public. And that's what Julian Assange did. So he's certainly not a spy, because a spy would not publish it. And that's the proof right there that he did not commit espionage. You know, he's been away.
That's a very good point, the way you said that. That's
now,
3 clips Joe should
put another clip. All right. While you've been away, there was a rally the other day at the Department of Justice. You would have been there. You were at the last one in October, as you recall. In front of the, yeah, we had one on April 11th, the day of the arrest of Julian Assange. And in my remarks, I pointed out this bizarre psychological phenomenon that I have to call some kind of psychological appropriation. I don't know what else to call it. And that is, and you may have heard this, I don't know, since you've been away during this period, that Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer, and then the State Department all made statements about the Wall Street Journal reporter saying journalism is not a crime. Now, where have you heard that before? That is, you. Yeah, that is an Assange, obviously.
For Julian Assange.
Exactly. It is a slogan owned and created by Julian Assange supporters. How does Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer and the State Department now say journalism is not a crime unless they're trolling Assange, trolling his supporters, or they just appropriated this? And the example I gave, Randy, and you're old enough as I am to remember, in 1968 in Woodstock, when Jimi Hendrix played the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. Do you remember the outcry by conservatives in this country? This was during, of course, the anti-Vietnam War period, during the Vietnam War. There was total outrage that Jimi Hendrix had desecrated the American national anthem. And then fast forward 34 years, I'm walking into Madison Square Garden to the National Republican National Convention. And what do I hear on the loudspeakers? Jimi Hendrix's national anthem at a Republican National Convention. So 30 years later, they appropriated that for themselves. It takes them a while to get with the
Code Pink then?
popular culture.
Wait a
Sorry?
second. You were there? You were there? Were you with Code Pink at the Republican National Convention? I'm joking here.
No, I was not. I went in. I had a press pass, and I got in.
How could you get in there?
Reporter.
How did
I had
you
a press pass to get in the garden. I went into the garden for this, and the first thing I heard was was Jimi Hendrix. So I made that example to show that this is what the State Department and Schumer and McConnell have done. They've taken what their enemies' slogans or music symbol and appropriated for themselves. And it's just some weird psychological thing that they would actually say journalism is not a crime while they keeping Julian in jail, and they're going to do whatever they can to extradite him. I don't have any confidence, unfortunately, despite Rashida Tlaib's letter, which is great, to Garland, that there is no way they're going to stop this extradition. And yet they could use that same slogan to talk about this this Wall Street Journal reporter there. So if he was intending to report this, well, I don't say, then he's not a spy based on the definition I gave. But it is a curious story to be writing about, to try to find out what the American intelligence and government would want to find out, which is what is the status of their new tank production. But, another example, Randy, is in this guy that they just arrested in the United States, a National Guardsman, he's 21 years old, for leaking, or not actually leaking, but putting these documents in Discord. And Elizabeth, you remember we used Discord in the early days of the Assange vigils. I'd never heard of Discord till then. Gaming, I think it's supposed to have been encrypted. I think that was the reason they were using it. So this guy put it out there just to show off to this group of young guys that considered him a god, basically. And eventually that came out. But who led the investigation to find this guy? The New York Times, not the FBI. They're doing the job.
Shocked. There's gambling going on here.
There's a whole lot of gambling going on here.
It's like the media is not. The media is not happy to just be, second best to WikiLeaks. They have to be the actual anti-WikiLeaks. They have to actively do the government's job. It's absurd.
Point. I think that's a fourth clip. Elizabeth gets a clip.
Yeah, she does. That's one that stands, and less is more. And I've learned that in 40 years in show business, is less is more. You give 5 minutes, make them want to hear more. And so that's perfect what she just said. You're right. Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer have never had a creative thought in their life. They're both hack politicians. They have no ideology except for self-promotion and self-preservation. And they want to be in the Senate, like Strom Thurmond. The rest of their lives, they love it. Politics in the U.S. is like show business. It's for ugly people who want to be in show business. And if you take a look at that, you take a look at the Senate, from Charles Grassley to Chuck Schumer, there's a lot of fucking ugly people there that want to be, because where else would they be? Where else would they be? So they go along to get along. And so you expected that those two came out. They came out together. It was a big story. They rarely agree on anything except for the fact that this is a persecuted journalist in Russia. Without even knowing, I don't know. I'm reserving until I see all of the facts. I don't want to see any journalists in prison, but I've seen so many in prison that the U.S. did not support. It seems like there are only two people they support: this guy and Navalny. That's it. Those are the only two individuals in the world that they care about that are in prison. The rest of them can rot in hell as far as they are concerned. But I don't know. It's like, look, you know what I have, Joe? The 5 days I was there, I'm really, admittedly, it's like, for me, I'm a frail individual. All right. And it's almost like I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't sleep at night. And I'm not going to be able to when I get back. this had an impact on me being in the war zone for 5 days, in the red zone, the yellow zone, green zone, wherever it was. I did not know what I was getting myself into. I'm glad that I went down there, but it has had an effect that's going to take me a long time to get over. You know, I get very emotional thinking about it.
I was wondering if you wanted to comment on any of the videos that Cathy might show specifically, talk a little bit more about what's in them. I mean, I know you've talked a lot about your discussions with this young girl, but that or anything else you want to talk about?
I hate this. I was, God, I'm not even going to say shell shock, but just seeing these missiles in the ground into a blacktop, cement that went down 4 or 5 feet. And the videos of the beautiful monument on a 40-mile ride up a muddy dirt road called S5E5. And it was all the Russians. It was one of the greatest battles of all time. On the right-hand side, there's a monument to those who sacrificed their lives against the Nazis. On the left-hand side, it's a monument to the 17 people on the hill, on the S5E5. It's a hill that was able to fight off 2 battalions of Azov battalions that were trying to get through. They took over the hill, and they have, and one of them was a woman, female commander, and you got her picture on these beautiful, beautiful statues. And then you have this giant statue in front of it. That was one of the most gut-wrenching moments to see what the resolve of those in the DPR and then in 1945, fighting off the Nazis. And they blended these 2 monuments together. And you look down the hill, where 17 people, they were able to get the word out to bring in some batteries to fight off these battalions, 2 battalions of Azov battalions trying to get through to Donbass. And that's why there's 2 sides of this monument. And you had to go through 40 kilometers of mud in an armored car to get there.
This is the monument I talked about earlier today, one of them. This is a tribute to the Red Army that won this big battle over here called, what was it called, sir?
Sour Mogila.
Sour Mogila. Would that be it? Here in the Donetsk People's Republic. So you got this. This is new, this part over here, this facade. And on the other side, that is from 2014 after the coup in Kyiv. People here did not want to be part of it. They voted to stay out of it. And so troops were sent up here, and a group of about 17, 18 very brave fighters were able to hold off and turn back these battalions that were sent in. And they kind of destroyed this monument. We're going to go there next.
How majestic and how, like I said, gut-wrenching when you look at it, what they did, the heroics of the people fighting against the onslaught in 2014. Joe alluded to it earlier, the coup in 2000. We haven't spoken about the coup much, and Joe knows more about it than I do. Even though I'm here, but Joe is really an expert on that coup. And maybe you can talk about it a little bit, Joe, just to remind me of what it was about.
Well, it was a coup, and that's in itself a controversial thing to say. And in response to NewsGuard that said that we had published false content about that, I wrote, it turned out to be a 12,000 a long piece, I can't remember how long it was, about the existence of neo-Nazis or Nazis in Ukraine and the coup. These were 2 things that we were told we had published was false. And in the Nazi article, I found a U.S. government-funded study which tells the whole story about post-war period in which the CIA, the new CIA, formed a relationship, particularly with this guy, Mykola Lebed, who was at one point a right-hand man of Stepan Bandera, who the Americans didn't want to work with, funny enough, this study says, but the British did. But they worked with Lebed, they set him up in New York, and then they would send him back to Ukraine for sabotage operations that lasted pretty much all the way until 1991 Ukrainian independence. So the CIA used these Banderaites for almost 50 years after the war. So that relationship is not new that they have with Azov. It's going on, it's continued, and that's one thing. As far as the coup, there's a lot of details. I recommend people go and read my piece about that in Consortium News, because there are things that people say about when buildings were occupied, for example, by the protesters. The official word is that it happened after Yanukovych left, but I found evidence in Ukrainian newspapers, for example, that it was days before that buildings were taken over, government buildings. This was a U.S.-backed coup. The man fled for his life, Yanukovych. He had agreed the day before he left with the European negotiators to hold early elections. So if they didn't want him, they could have voted him out. But the protesters didn't accept that. There was a lot of violence in the square, and he fled for his life there. It's called a coup d'etat. I mean, at the same time that happened, Hadi, the president of Yemen, left Yemen on a boat. Yanukovych left on a helicopter. He left Aden, Hadi did. And I remember asking the spokesman of the UN spokesman in the Daily Noon briefing, what makes a coup and what makes somebody run away? Because the Western diplomats were saying that in Yemen it was a coup, that the Houthi overthrew Hadi, but Yanukovych was not a coup. He just ran away. So I wondered whether if you leave in a helicopter, you ran away, and if you leave in a boat, it was a coup. Because this is the kind of double standard we saw there. So you read the piece, because it's a lot of detail I can't call up right now. But there's no question there was $5 billion over 10 years that Victoria Nuland admitted the U.S. had poured into Ukraine. The head of the NED at the time, the guy who founded Gershwin, his name was, I believe, Carl Gershwin, I think. He said that basically threatened Putin is next, and that Ukraine is the big prize that has to go into the Western camp. And when Yanukovych chose a Russian economic deal over the European Unions, that's when this was activated. And as people know, the NED works with civil society in various countries to train them in protest method, to create media, the anti-government media. It's a way to use soft power, eventually leading to an overthrow of a government. And David Ignatius wrote a piece in 1991, I believe, saying that the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, now does in the open what the CIA used to do covertly, namely overthrowing governments that the United States didn't like. So, I mean, there's tons of evidence that that was a coup, but it has to be portrayed as a revolution. And this is a problem. It was an anti-Russian coup, clearly. And then right after the coup, of course, the Poroshenko government launched this so-called anti-terrorist war. It was basically a war to crush an independence movement in Donbass, where you've just been, Randy. And that led to thousands of people being killed over 8 years. And that is excised from the Western media reporting, even though they reported it at the time. And they even reported about the existence of Azov and other Nazi groups, right sector, etc. That's all gone now. This is just Putin woke up one morning and decided which country he was going to invade that day, and happened to be Ukraine.
I have to add to this right now before I forget. What you said is right on. And that's the reason why Cathy or you will be receiving an interview. I'm not taking it with me. I've deleted it, but you will somehow get an interview I had last week with a guy who lives in Donetsk, who's Ukrainian, who was the head of the emergency services in Kiev for Ukraine in 2014. He's Ukrainian, he lives in Donetsk. I had a 2.5 hour interview and I had an interpreter, but what he says will verify everything that you just said with a lot more color to it, a lot more detail. I am not going to be able to take that interview back with me. So we are going to give that to you. And I know that Cathy will do an incredible job taking the translation from this guy, really a very important government figure in Ukraine. The only interview with him that's out there. And that's going to you. It's an exclusive for Consortium News. It can take a week or two, but it's an unbelievable. I sound like Sammy Davis Jr. Unbelievable interview. But I have a translator on the spot, and what he has to say. And he's Ukrainian who lives in Donetsk, and he goes back and forth. He quit. He quit when the coup happened after a couple of weeks and saw what was going on. There's some detail there, meetings that were happening, and I'm unable. I don't have the resources and ability to do what I know you two can do. So it's going to you, and I hope you take it and put it out in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, Randy. So before I wrap it up, I had two very quick questions. Did you visit those steelworks in Mariupol? Because that's where the final battle was. That was the major battle that dragged on for so long.
Yes.
This is a significant point here. This is it's called Azovstal. This is a huge steel plant over here, a legitimate target by the Russians that came in here back in March and April of last year. Not a civilian target. This is a military target. That's where Azov was. And during this intense battle, NATO advisors were here trying to extricate some of these Azov battalion forces out of here, but they failed because the place was completely encircled. One note I want to make is that this monument here is a monument to remember the Red Army that liberated Donbass here in 1945, I believe. So this monument was dedicated to them, and that's it for right now, because I have a lot to absorb. It's difficult for me to say the name of the city, Mary Oakville. I've gotten so many different pronunciations, but hey, we're live on the fly. That's what happens. See you soon. Randy Credico on PRN, and of course, my home base for years, that is WBAI.
And there were a lot of military up there because that's called the Azovstal steelworks, and then it goes down 4 or 5 fortified floors, and there are still possibly Azov battalion troops there, or even maybe NATO troops who were NATO advisors trying to get them out. But I deliberately did not take video of Russian troops or DPR troops there who were going in and trying to find who was still inside where that shelling was from. So yes, I was at steelworks. And of course I was scared shitless. You can there.
You're allowed to swear. You're allowed to swear. Those are dead bodies, of course. You're talking about that. They were living in these tunnels for the longest time when they were.
They're still there. There are still living people in those tunnels.
Living,
and
they think there's living people in the tunnels there.
You saw a lot of DPR personnel there on the spot, and I would not take video of this. I wanted to, but I didn't. Okay. Those were going inside. A very ballsy thing to do, to go inside that steel factory there on the Azovstal, where all of the shelling was coming from, and the NATO advisors were there trying to extricate them. That's where I was. That was my last day. My last couple of hours was up there, and of course I'm walking in circles trying to figure out where do I go. if something flies out of that battery command inside of the Azovstal battalion headquarters. But they're still, they believe that they are still there. I mean, it goes down. It's like one of those New York City parking lots that goes down 4 or 5 floors, and fortified and equipped with a lot of food and communication abilities. So you don't know, but I can tell you that there were plenty of military there to dig deep into it. So, that was it. And then, what can I tell you after that? Then I went, the last thing before I left, and after I spoke to that young woman in the pizza place, there are a lot of Central Asian workers there. They get well paid, and they are really, it's like the Mohawks that built the Empire State Building. They build within 3 months, these beautiful apartment buildings. And so there are 8 or 9 huge buildings that probably have 500 to 600 units that are being constructed every 3 months, a unit like that. And it's not like, someone will say, well, there must be slaves. No, they were walking around, they were smoking cigarettes, they were eating lunch, and then coming back and doing the work. They're just hardworking people that know how to construct edifices like these apartment buildings that I saw as I was leaving. And there was this beautiful dog that stood on top of the rubble. This dog that just looked down at the entire affair going on with defiance. And that really embodied the defiance of the people of the DPR. They're not going anywhere. They are going to fight to the very last man and woman. They're not going anywhere. So you got to be, you have to realize that the resolve that they have.
Sorry, I understand those apartments are being given by the Russian government for free to people. My final question, Randy, is you've had a full life, you've had lots of experiences. Where does this rank in terms of the significance of this experience to you?
Well, there's Rockefeller drug laws, there's Tuya, Texas, there's Nicaragua. It's my comedy career, which forget about that. And then the divestment of private prisons in New York State. This is at the top because this is the most important. This is the most important. That's why I had to do it. I'm 68 years old, 69 years old. How much more time do I have? How could I say no? It's whatever I can do, I'm not going to be able to stop it. There's going to be millions of people like myself that are going to have to stand up and fight against what is a potential existential threat to humanity. It's not me. It's everybody else. I'm glad to be part of the fabric that is fighting this, and that's what it's going to take. A lot of stitching in that fabric to stop what is definitely possible, which is it's like the end of Planet of the Apes when Charlton Heston sees the Statue of Liberty in the water. That's where we're heading right now. And so I'm not supporting anybody. I don't support war. I'm supporting peace. And this is right up there. If I had a cherry to put on my career, this would be the cherry coming here. There is nothing like this that I've done in my lifetime more important than this.
Randy Credico, thank you very much for joining us on CNLive today.
It's my pleasure, and thank you very much, Joe and Elizabeth, for Cathy, for having me on. It's really an honor to be on this award-winning organization's broadcast. And my love to Bob Perry. And see, I should never have a shot of vodka before I say that. Here's to Bob Perry, and you've done an incredible job, all of you. And thank you for all of the work that you've done and having me on today.
Well, thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
She also wanted to ask you a question.
Yes, you asked me a question.
Ну, а вы как относитесь вообще к России? Ведь Америка, она как бы против.
What is your opinion about Russia? Because
I
the
love-
United States is another side.
I love Russia. I love the Russian people. I love the DPR, and it's an intelligent, culturally advanced civilization that I'm not at war with Russia. The government may be at war, but the American people like Russians. We like Russians. We like your food. We love borscht. We love your music. We love Tchaikovsky. We love Rimsky-Korsakov. We love your literature. We love Dostoevsky. We love that you beat the Nazis in World War II and saved the world from Nazism. We have a lot of respect for Russia and for the old Soviet Union, for the contribution that you have made culturally and politically and militarily in defeating Nazism.
Как вам вообще Путин? Как вы к нему относитесь?
And what is your opinion about Mr. Putin?
I think he's a very smart, able leader that is definitely in support of the people of Russia. He's got their interests at heart. He's not a corrupt politician. I do not think he's a corrupt politician. I think he's much more stable and able than any of the politicians that we have in Washington, D.C.
Get out your notebook. There's more.
If you are a consumer of independent news, then the first place you should be going to is Consortium News, and please do try to support them when you can. It doesn't have its articles behind a paywall. It's free for everyone. It's one of the best news sites out there, and it's been in the business of independent journalism and adversarial independent journalism for over 2 decades. I hope that with the public's continuing support of Consortium News, it will continue for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.